Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The defeat had come like a tidal wave, crashing over every certainty the president once held dear. Only 2 days ago, he stood before the citizens of the United States delivering a concession speech that no amount of charisma could soften. The election had been brutal, a battle of ideals, vision, and power. Now it was over, and the title of President of the United States no longer belonged to him. He was just another man who had once worn the crown. As his motorcade drove him away from the Capitol, flanked by the security detail that seemed too large and unnecessary now, the president's mind spiraled. He was no longer the future, no longer the one to carry the torch for humanity. Someone else would lead. Someone who he believed in his heart would lead humanity astray. When they arrived at the secluded estate, the president was greeted by a handful of close advisors who had stood by him through the campaign. They had all seen the same dream of a better future for humanity. Now that dream was dead. Yet tonight they had something to show him, something that might change everything. A chance, they hinted, to reclaim control, but they spoke in half whispers in the language of conspiracy. In the heart of the estate's underground bunker, they revealed the device. It was a peculiar machine built by government scientists working in the shadows. According to them, it had the power to manipulate the flow of time itself. A time rift, they called it, a wormhole to the future. Sci-Fi Seduction. Marcus, one of the chief engineers, the president looked at the device, a towering mass of cables, metal, and glowing blue energy, its existence barely making sense in the realm of what he knew to be possible. "We believe this can show us what's to come," Dr. Marcus explained. "We've been able to stabilize the rift, but we don't know exactly where it leads." The president felt a stir of hope, mingled with unease. Could this be it? Could he see the future and prevent his greatest fears from coming to pass? "I need to know," he whispered more to himself than to anyone in the room. And so they activated the machine. The air shimmered, the blue glow intensifying, and with a sharp crack of energy, reality itself seemed to bend. The president's body felt weightless for a brief moment before everything spun violently and darkness swallowed him whole. When he opened his eyes, he wasn't in the underground bunker anymore. He was lying on a cold metallic floor in an alien place that resembled nothing he knew. The sky above him was a strange color, a deep purplish black, littered with unfamiliar constellations. The air was thick and oppressive, and the structures around him were towering, twisted monoliths made of sleek metal and alien symbols. He struggled to his feet, disoriented, his head throbbing with the aftereffects of the rift. Where am I?" he muttered, trying to gather his bearing. There was no response, only the eerie silence of a world that felt lifeless. But then in the distance, he heard it, a mechanical sound, sharp and rhythmic, like boots marching on metal. Before he could react, figures appeared, tall, humanoid shapes, encased in armor, their faces hidden beneath helmets, with glowing red visors. They weren't human, that much was clear. They moved with an eerie precision, and behind them, dragging their feet in chains, were people, humans, enslaved. The president saw his heart raced. He backed into the shadows, watching as the alien soldiers marched past. The humans, ragged and gaunt, shuffled along with vacant eyes, their bodies broken by labor. What had happened to the world he knew? Once the group had passed, he emerged from his hiding place and followed, keeping his distance but close enough to observe. They led the humans into a massive structure, a fortress of metal and energy, spires piercing the dark sky like claws. The president moved stealthily, avoiding patrols until he reached what seemed to be a control room. There, standing over a massive holographic map of the planet, were the leaders of this new regime, aliens, tall and grotesque, their skin pale and translucent, their eyes cold and calculating. "It's been over 3 centuries since the humans fell," one of them said, his voice a low growl. "Our hold on this planet is absolute. The resistance is nothing but a nuisance." The president's blood turned to ice. 3 centuries. Had he truly traveled so far into the future? His mind raced. If humanity had fallen to these alien oppressors, then what had become of Earth? How had this future come to pass, and more importantly, could he stop it? Before he could contemplate his next move, the room filled with alarm. The aliens barked orders in their guttural language, and the president knew he had been spotted. He darted out of the control room, running through the narrow corridors of the fortress, his heart pounding in his chest. But escape was impossible. The fortress was a labyrinth, and soon he was cornered. The alien soldiers surrounded him, their weapons raised. One of them stepped forward, lifting its visor to reveal a twisted face with reptilian features. It spoke in a voice that sent chills down the president's spine. "You do not belong here," it hissed. "You are an anomaly, a ripple in time. You will be corrected." The president didn't have time to react before he felt a sharp pain in the back of his neck and everything went black again. When he awoke, he was in a dimly lit room, restrained to a chair by metal cuff. His body ached and his mind swirled with confusion. He was no longer in a fortress, but a small underground bunker. The walls were lined with old human technology, outdated computers, worn maps, and relics from a world long gone. A figure stood before him, a woman with dark hair pulled into a tight bun, her eyes sharp and filled with determination. She wore a patchwork uniform, clearly a makeshift piece from what little resources were left. "You reawake," she said, her voice calm but with an edge of impatience. "Good, we don't have much time." The president struggled against his restraints, but they held firm. "Where am I? Who are you?" The woman knelt in front of him, her gaze piercing. "I am Dr. Elena Valdez, leader of the human resistance." "And you?" She paused, studying him carefully. "You read the president, aren't you? The one from the past?" His heart skipped a beat. "How do you know that?" "We have been waiting for you," she said simply, standing up and beginning to pace. "For years we've known about the time rift. We've been trying to use it to send one of our own back to warn humanity before the invasion, but the Exaringas control it too tightly. When you arrived, we knew the rift had finally brought someone important, someone who might change everything." "Exaros," the president head spun. "That's who they are." "The alien race that enslaved us," Dr. Valdez replied. "They invaded centuries ago when Earth was fractured and weak. Humanity never stood a chance. Now they use time itself as their weapon, ensuring we remain in control no matter what we do." The president's breath caught in his throat. It was worse than he could have imagined. The world he knew was gone and the future was a nightmare, but deep within him, something stirred. This was the fight of his life, the one he had been born to lead. "How do we stop them?" he asked, his voice low but filled with resolve. Dr. Valdez smiled grimly. "We take the fight to them. We destroy the time nexus, the central point from which the Express controlled time itself. If we destroy it, we might be able to rewrite history, prevent the invasion, save humanity." The president's heart pounded in his chest. This was his chance to make everything right, to save not just the future but the past as well. "Then let's do it," he said, his voice firm. "Let's take back our world." Dr. Valdez nodded and moved to release his restraints. "There's no turning back from this," she warned. "Once we start, the Scifiaudiobooks will stop at nothing to eliminate it." The president met her gaze, his determination unshakable. "I've faced word." As he stood up, feeling the weight of his purpose settling on his shoulders, he knew that the battle ahead would be unlike anything he had ever faced before. But he also knew one thing for certain. He was the president of humanity once more, and he would not fail this time. The president adjusted to the dim light of the bunker as his mind focused on the mission ahead. The weight of the future and the past bore down on him as he followed Dr. Valdez through a narrow corridor lined with remnants of old human technology. The hum of machinery filled the air, a faint reminder of the ingenuity that humanity once possessed, now reduced to fragments, scavenged from a forgotten world. "Your arrival has caused a ripple in time," Dr. Valdez said, her voice cutting through the silence as they walked. "The HFYs will be looking for you. They were already hunting us, but now with you here, they'll escalate." The president's fists clenched. He had faced political enemies, maneuvered through the twisted corridors of power, but this was something far greater. The stakes were no longer about winning an election or shaping policy. It was about survival, about reclaiming humanity's sound future from the clutches of an alien empire that had bent time to their will. They emerged into a larger room, where a small group of ragtag soldiers stood around a table. Maps, holographic projections, and old data disks cluttered the surface. These weren't trained soldiers trained in any formal sense. They were survivors, resistance fighters who had spent their lives under the iron heel of the Scifiaudiobooks, fighting a war that had long seemed hopeless. "This is our team," Dr. Valdez said, introducing him to the group. We've also been planning an assault on the time nexus for years. Now with you here, we have the final piece. You know what, so let's state. The president studied their faces. Each one carried the scars of war, both physical and emotional. There was Jack, a wiry man with quick eyes and a faster trigger finger, who had lost his family to an ex-gross purge. Eva, a tall woman with short cropped hair, her face etched with defiance, had been one of the first to join the resistance after her home city was leveled by the invaders. And then there was Nate, a former scientist who had turned to guerrilla warfare after his research was co-opted by the enemy. They nodded at the president, acknowledging him not as a stranger, but as someone who had been destined to stand among them. There was no room for hesitation now. Dr. Valdez spread out a holographic display of the time nexus, a massive spiraling structure located deep within Exgroth's territory. It was the source of their control over time, the very reason they had been able to rewrite history and maintain their dominance over Earth. The nexus heavily fortified, she explained, we will need to disable their time lock mechanisms to even have a chance of getting close. Once we are inside, we plant the explosives at the core and get out before the whole thing collapses. If we succeed, the Gaxos lose their ability to manipulate time. History resets. The president's mind raced as he absorbed the details. The plan was daring, audacious even, but it was the only option they had left. If they failed, the Sacros would tighten their grip on humanity forever. We move at dawn, Jack said, his voice low but firm. Ilivat got one shot at this. Let's make it count. The president met their gazes, his resolve hardening. Shira, we will ferry, he said. Day, we have to. The hours before the mission passed in a blur of preparation. Weapons were checked and rechecked, supplies were gathered, and final strategies were whispered among the team. The president felt the weight of responsibility grow with each passing moment. He had been a leader before, but this was different. This wasn't just about saving a country. This was about saving the future of the entire human race. As the first light of dawn filtered through the cracks in the bunker, the team gathered at the exit. They were dressed in stolen Axaros armor, the alien technology fitting awkwardly, but offering them a chance to slip past the initial patrol. The president strapped on the armor, feeling its cold weight settle over his shoulder. It was uncomfortable, foreign, but it would keep him alive at least for the first part of the mission. Dr. Valdez handed him a small device, no bigger than his palm. This is the detonator. When we reach the core, you will need to place this directly into the central processor. Once it's armed, we'll have 10 minutes to get out before the nexus collapses. He nodded, gripping the device tightly. This was it. There was no turning back. The journey to the nexus was tense but uneventful at first. The armor allowed them to blend in with the Exaros patrols, their movements precise and robotic, mimicking the disciplined march of the alien. The president felt a surge of unease as they passed enslaved humans laboring in the alien cities, their eyes hollow and devoid of hope. He wanted to reach out to tell them that freedom was near, but he knew any mistake now would cost them everything. As they approached the nexus, the towering structure loomed above them like a dark god, its spires reaching into the sky, crackling with the energy of time itself. The air around it shimmered, as if reality were struggling to contain the sheer power emanating from its core. This is it, Dr. Valdez whispered as they crouched behind a ridge overlooking the complex. We split into 2 teams. Jack, Ava, and Nate will handle the outer defenses. The president and I will make our way to the core. The president's heart pounded as they moved swiftly through the shadows, bypassing sentries and security drones. The closer they got to the nexus, the more the air seemed to thrum with energy. It was almost disorienting, the sense that time itself was bending and twisting around them. Finally, they reached the central chamber. The core of the time nexus was a massive, pulsating machine, its surface covered in alien glyphs and glowing with an eerie light. It was the heart of the Exegoral's power, the source of their control over history. Dr. Valdez motioned to the president. With steady hands, he approached the core, pulling out the detonator. As he placed it into the central processor, the machine whirred to life, the glyphs shifting and rearranging as if trying to resist the intrusion. The president held his breath as the device locked into place. "Is that done?" he whispered. But as they turned to leave, the room flooded with light, and the hum of the machinery grew louder. The president's stomach dropped. The ex-Growls had found that from the shadows, a figure emerged, an Exagrowl, thus commander, tall and imposing, its eyes glowing with malice. "You cannot change what is inevitable," It hissed, "Your time bends to our will. You are nothing but a relic of a forgotten past." Dr. Valdez raised her weapon, her expression fierce. Rewriting the future. T, she said through gritted teeth. Teeth in there, said nothing you can do to stop it. The commander lunged, its claws gleaming in the dim light. The president barely had time to react as he and Dr. Valdez dove for cover, their weapons blazing. The room erupted into chaos, bullets ricocheting off metal and energy blasts, searing the wall. The president's mind raced as he fought, ducking behind machinery and returning fire. The detonator was armed. They had less than 10 minutes to escape, but the Escarolla's commander was relentless, its movements swift and deadly. In a moment of clarity, the president saw an opening. He surged forward, slamming into the commander with all his strength, sending them both crashing to the ground. The alien screeched, its claws lashing out, but the president held firm, grabbing a discarded weapon and firing point blank into its chest. The commander convulsed, its body collapsing into a heap as the light faded from its eye. "We need to go now," Dr. Valdez shouted, pulling the president to his feet. They raced through the corridors, the walls shaking as the Nexus began to destabilize. The air was thick with the sound of alarms and the rumble of collapsing structure. Time itself seemed to warp around them, the fabric of reality tearing at the seams as the Nexus began to fall apart. The others were already at the extraction point, their faces grim but determined. The president and Dr. Valdez barely made it as the ground trembled beneath their feet. As they lifted off in their escape craft, the Nexus collapsed behind them in a brilliant explosion of light and energy, a final burst of power that echoed across the sky. And just like that, it was over. The time Nexus was gone. The Tyrannos had lost their control over time. The president watched the scene unfold from the viewport, his heart heavy but filled with a sense of triumph. He didn't know what the future would hold now, but one thing was certain: history had been rewritten. The timeline would be different. Humanity had a chance.